"No one will save you," they mocked, until the rancher said, "Not today." The rancher had lived on that land for most of his life. Long before people started noticing him, long before problems arrived, he was already there, waking up before sunrise and working until the sky turned dark. His days followed a steady rhythm. He checked the fences, fed the animals, repaired broken tools, and watched the weather like it was a living thing. The land was not rich or beautiful in a dramatic way, but it was honest. It gave back only what a person was willing to work for. That suited him well. He was not a loud man. He did not enjoy talking just to fill silence. When he spoke, his words were simple and direct. Some people mistook that quiet nature for weakness. Others assumed that because he lived far from the town center, he did not understand how the world worked. They were wrong, but the rancher never felt the need to correct them. He believed that actions mattered more than explanations. The ranch had belonged to his family for years. He remembered being a child, walking behind an older figure who taught him how to respect the land. He was shown how to listen to animals, how to notice small changes in the soil, and how to stay calm when things went wrong. Those lessons stayed with him. They shaped the man he became. Even when times were hard, he never thought about leaving. This land was not just property to him. It was part of his identity. As time passed, the area around the ranch began to change. New interests appeared, and new people arrived with different goals. They talked about growth, control, and progress, but their words felt empty to the rancher. He noticed strange looks when he drove into town. Conversations stopped when he entered a room. At first, he ignored it. He had work to do, and gossip did not feed animals or fix fences. Soon the mocking began. It was not loud at first. It came in the form of careless comments and half-smiles. People spoke as if he was invisible, as if he did not matter. They joked about his quiet life and old ways. Some said he was behind the times. Others said he did not stand a chance if trouble ever came his way. "No one will save you," they said, laughing softly, as if it were already decided. The rancher heard these words, even when they were not spoken directly to him. He felt them settle in the back of his mind. They were meant to shake him, to make him feel small, but he had faced storms stronger than words. He had watched crops fail and animals fall sick. He had learned that fear only grew when fed, so he kept his focus where it belonged. Still, something felt different. The mocking was not just about jokes or pride. There was a tone underneath it, something sharp and planned. He began to notice small changes around the ranch. Fence markers were moved. Boundaries that had been clear for decades were suddenly questioned. Papers appeared with claims that made no sense. When he tried to ask simple questions, he received unclear answers or polite dismissals. People who once greeted him now avoided him. Some neighbors stopped visiting. Others warned him quietly to be careful, but none of them were willing to stand beside him openly. They had their own worries. They did not want attention drawn to themselves. The rancher understood that fear can make good people silent. He did not blame them. At night, when the land was quiet, he sat alone and thought. He thought about the years he had invested, the sacrifices he had made, and the future he wanted to protect. Doubt tried to creep in, but he pushed it away. He reminded himself that nothing valuable comes without resistance. He was not looking for a fight, but he would not run either. The people who mocked him believed he would eventually give up. They assumed he would sell, leave, or break under pressure. They believed he was isolated and powerless. From the outside, it may have looked that way. He lived alone, far from influence and noise. He had no powerful friends, no loud supporters. But what they did not see was his inner strength. They did not see the discipline built from years of hard work or the calm that comes from facing life honestly. Each morning, he continued his routine. The animals depended on him. The land depended on him. That responsibility gave him purpose. While others spoke behind closed doors, he prepared quietly. He reviewed documents, checked boundaries, and kept records. He did not rush. He did not panic. He knew that rushing only led to mistakes. The mocking continued. Some people said it directly to his face now. They smiled when they spoke, as if enjoying the moment. They told him that fighting would only make things worse. They told him he was alone in this. The rancher listened without reacting. He had learned long ago that anger clouds judgment. Instead, he observed. He remembered faces, words, and timing. Deep down, he felt the pressure growing. Even strong people feel weight when enough force is applied. There were moments when exhaustion hit him harder than usual, moments when he wondered if staying silent had been a mistake. But every time doubt appeared, he thought of the land. He thought of the promise he made to himself to protect what was rightfully his. He did not seek sympathy. He did not share his worries with many people. His strength came from within. He believed that standing firm did not require shouting or threats. Sometimes, it simply required refusing to step aside. By the end of that season, it was clear that things were moving toward a turning point. The mocking had turned into confidence. Those against him believed the outcome was already decided. They underestimated him because he did not match their image of resistance. They mistook patience for surrender. The rancher stood on his land one evening, watching the sun drop behind the fields. The air was calm, but he knew the calm would not last. He felt something settle inside him, not fear, but certainty. Whatever was coming, he would face it. He had not worked his whole life to walk away now. They believed no one would save him. They were right about one thing. He was not waiting to be saved. After the mocking had settled into a tense silence, the situation began to grow heavier. The rancher had felt it coming, but now it was clear. This was no longer simple talk or empty threats. The people around him, once just casual critics, were now making moves with real intention. Small gestures at first, a misplaced fence post, a question about land boundaries that seemed harmless but clearly designed to confuse him. Then, letters arrived in the mail. They contained claims, rules, and demands that seemed unreasonable. At first glance, they could have been mistakes, but he knew better. Everything now felt calculated. Neighbors who once exchanged a nod or a smile now walked past as if he were invisible. Some whispered to each other, casting glances at him, their eyes full of concern or maybe fear, but they did nothing. The rancher understood this silence. Fear was contagious. People protect themselves first and courage often comes last. Yet that did not weaken him. Instead, it reminded him that if he wanted to survive, he would have to rely only on himself. He spent his days preparing for challenges he could see and some he could not. He reviewed the legal papers carefully, making notes and taking photographs of the land. Every fence, every tool, every structure became a record of his ownership. He wanted no loophole, no accidental mistake, no claim left unchecked. He did this not out of suspicion, but from a simple understanding. Knowledge and preparation create power. While others tried to intimidate him, he quietly strengthened his position. Even as he worked, his mind remained alert. He noticed patterns. The same individuals were always involved, the same names signed on letters, the same smirks that appeared whenever a new demand arrived. Their strategy was clear: to exhaust him, to make him doubt himself, to create a sense of isolation that would push him into surrender. But the rancher had faced challenges before. Hard winters, failed crops, sick animals, and accidents had taught him endurance. Patience and steady action had always carried him through, and now patience became his shield once more. Despite this calm, pressure weighed heavily. There were moments, usually at night, when the rancher felt the isolation most deeply. The wind would blow through the trees, carrying the faint sounds of distant townspeople laughing or talking, and he would sit on the porch, staring at the stars, thinking of what he had to protect. His land, his animals, his legacy, they all depended on him. And yet, the very people who should have respected the land, who should have respected hard work and honesty, were attempting to take it away. That knowledge stung, but the rancher refused to let anger cloud his judgment. Anger could lead to mistakes, and mistakes could cost him everything. Some of the threats became more direct. A local official would ask confusing questions during routine checks, as if trying to trip him into admitting something false. Contractors would appear at the edges of his property, claiming to inspect boundaries or utilities, only to leave notes suggesting ownership disputes. The rancher calmly documented every interaction. He did not confront these people aggressively, but he did not ignore them either. Each detail, each action became part of a record, a silent but powerful defense. Even when he spoke to others, his words were measured. A neighbor approached him one afternoon, hesitating before asking if he had considered giving up the land. The rancher looked at him steadily and said nothing but a simple, confident, "I will not leave." There was no boast, no anger, just quiet certainty. The neighbor nodded, unsure if it was bravery or stubbornness. But the truth was that the rancher knew his strength came not from confrontation, but from calm endurance. He knew that time often exposes truth, and that patience can turn the tide against even the most confident oppressors. While others saw his life as simple and quiet, the rancher knew it was far from easy. Days were long, nights were filled with planning, and the weight of responsibility pressed on him constantly. But he also found clarity in his solitude. Alone, he could think clearly, analyze each move made against him, and decide his next step without distraction. Solitude became a tool. The quiet life he had always preferred now offered him an advantage, a mind sharpened by observation, ready for any challenge. Even as the pressure mounted, small victories appeared. Sometimes, a bureaucratic demand would turn out to be invalid. Sometimes, someone would inadvertently reveal the weakness of the plan against him. The rancher noticed these moments, and each one reinforced his belief that careful observation and steady action were stronger than fear or aggression. He began to sense that those who tried to intimidate him were not infallible. Their confidence relied on his fear. As long as he remained calm, they had nothing to hold against him. Despite his growing confidence, the rancher did not underestimate the situation. He knew that his opponents were persistent and willing to use every tool at their disposal. He anticipated escalations, and he acted before they could occur. Extra gates were added, records of livestock inventories were updated daily, and he strengthened the fences that marked the boundaries of his land. Every action was deliberate. He did not rush or act out of anger. He acted with the precision of someone who knew that mistakes now could cost him everything later. There were moments when outsiders came to observe him, trying to gauge his response. A truck would stop at the edge of his property, a shadow would linger in the trees, and he would notice it immediately. He would watch quietly from a distance, learning about their patterns, timing, and behavior. Knowledge, he had learned, was a weapon in its own right. While they believed they were intimidating him, he was quietly gathering intelligence, preparing for a future in which he would respond decisively. As the days turned into weeks, the situation became more intense. The mocking that once seemed harmless now carried a sharper edge. Letters and demands arrived more frequently. Conversations with officials became more formal and tense. Even the local community began to notice the quiet struggle unfolding at the ranch, though few dared to intervene. The rancher felt the isolation keenly, but he also felt a strange sense of purpose. He had faced hard work, hardship, and loss before, and he knew that every challenge revealed character. This was not just about land, it was about integrity, courage, and persistence. In the evenings after the work was done, the rancher would sit by the porch, sometimes with a cup of tea, watching the sky darken. The stars were bright and steady, a reminder that the world continues even when struggles seem overwhelming. He reflected on his past, the lessons from his family, the wisdom of those who had taught him to respect the land. These memories were not just comfort, they were guidance. They reminded him that every hardship could be faced with calm resolve and careful planning. Despite the constant pressure, he did not allow fear to dominate his life. He maintained routines, kept animals healthy, and repaired every corner of the land that needed attention. Even as others sought to intimidate him, he remained consistent. His work ethic, his persistence, and his calm demeanor became his shield against attempts to weaken him. He did not fight openly because he did not need to. His strength lay in his patience, in his ability to endure, and in his refusal to be shaken by fear or mockery. There were moments, however, when the loneliness felt heavy. The rancher could see friends and neighbors enjoying simple moments together while he carried the weight of constant observation and preparation. But even these moments were lessons. He learned to value his own judgment above the opinions of others. He learned to trust that careful planning and patient action would ultimately bring justice. The solitude, while difficult, made him stronger. The pressure against him was relentless. It became clear that those who had mocked him did not plan to stop until he showed weakness. Their confidence grew as they assumed that isolation equaled powerlessness. But the rancher had learned a vital truth: strength does not always shout. Often it waits, observes, and acts at the right moment. While they believed they controlled the situation, he quietly prepared for the moment when he would take control. The rancher understood that challenges were not just about defending property, they were tests of character. Every unfair demand, every attempt to intimidate, every act of mockery was an opportunity to demonstrate resilience, and he intended to meet each challenge with calm determination. He did not rush, he did not panic, and he did not let fear rule his actions. Instead, he strengthened his position with knowledge, preparation, and patience. By the end of this tense season, it was clear that the situation was approaching a turning point. The rancher had quietly documented every interaction, every act of intimidation, every attempt to undermine him. He had strengthened his fences, maintained his land, and prepared for any escalation. The people who mocked him believed their plan was foolproof, assuming he would crack under pressure. But he had proven, through months of careful action and quiet endurance, that their assumptions were wrong. The rancher had learned an essential truth: survival does not come from relying on others to act on your behalf. It comes from understanding your strengths, preparing carefully, and standing firm even when it seems that everyone else has turned away. The isolation that once seemed a burden had become an advantage. He could act with clarity, make decisions without distraction, and prepare for a future where courage and patience would be more powerful than threats or mockery. As winter approached, the rancher walked across his land, observing every fence, every field, and every animal. The wind was cold, but he felt steady. He knew that challenges were not yet over. He knew that the people who mocked him would not give up easily. But he also knew something more important. He was ready. He had prepared, observed, and strengthened himself in ways that no mockery could undo. He was alone, yes, but he was not powerless. He was not afraid. And for the first time, he began to sense the moment when the balance might shift in his favor. Winter had arrived, and the air carried a sharp chill that made each morning feel heavier than the last. The rancher moved through the land as he always did, boots crunching on frost-covered soil, hands steady as he checked the fences and counted the animals. Everything seemed the same, but he knew better. This season would bring the most critical test of all. The people who had mocked him, the ones who had whispered, "No one will save you," were preparing their final moves. They were confident, almost careless, certain he would give in when the pressure became too much. But they did not understand the quiet strength he had been building all these months. It began with subtle changes. A truck appeared at the edge of his property in the early morning, its engine low and deliberate. He noticed it immediately. He watched it from a distance, observing the movements of the people inside. They were checking boundaries, taking notes, talking in hushed tones. The rancher did not confront them. He took photographs and recorded the time, date, and license plate numbers. Every detail mattered. He understood that anger would be useless, but preparation could be powerful. Each observation was part of a growing record that would protect him when the moment of confrontation arrived. Soon, more direct challenges came. Legal notices appeared at the mailbox, demanding inspections, threatening fines, and questioning his ownership. These were carefully written, filled with technical language meant to confuse and intimidate. The rancher read every line carefully. He did not rush. He annotated, cross-referenced, and filed each document in a folder that he kept meticulously organized. Every letter became a tool in his defense, a way to prove that his property and his actions were correct. He had learned that preparation is often stronger than confrontation. Despite the tension, he did not let fear take root. Fear, he knew, was a dangerous companion. It clouds judgment, makes mistakes more likely, and can turn calm actions into rash decisions. He reminded himself that the people who threatened him relied on fear to weaken his resolve. If he remained steady, their confidence would crumble. Every step he took, every fence he repaired, every note he wrote was a quiet act of defiance. They could mock, intimidate, and threaten, but they could not break him as long as he stayed focused and patient. The days grew longer and colder, but he continued his work without complaint. He repaired fences, ensured the animals had enough food and water, and checked every part of the property that could be challenged. The land was alive with small signs of life, each one a reminder of what he had to protect. The animals, unaware of human conflicts, trusted him completely. Their dependence on him gave him clarity and purpose. He had a responsibility that went beyond words or mockery. This was about life, survival, and integrity. Neighbors still avoided him. Some whispered, "He won't last," or "He will give in soon." But he paid them no mind. Their words carried nothing that could harm him, only reflections of their own fears. He had learned to separate what mattered from what did not. What mattered were facts, preparation, and timing. What did not matter were opinions based on assumptions. He understood the difference between those who acted out of knowledge and those who acted out of doubt. This understanding became his secret advantage. Then came the moment he had been waiting for, the direct challenge. It was an ordinary morning, yet it carried extraordinary tension. A group of people appeared at the edge of his property. They had brought paperwork, cameras, and measuring tools. They expected him to react in fear, to show signs of weakness. They believed their plan would work because, in their minds, he was alone and unprepared. But the rancher had been ready for this day. He did not panic, he did not hesitate, and he did not retreat. He approached calmly. Every step was deliberate, every movement controlled. The people who had mocked him looked surprised at his composure. They had expected a reaction fueled by fear or frustration. Instead, they faced a man who was steady, observant, and unafraid. He did not shout or threaten. He did not try to fight them physically. He relied on preparation, knowledge, and presence of mind. His calmness unsettled them more than any argument could have. They realized too late that patience had given him power they could not see. The confrontation began with questions and accusations. They claimed errors in property boundaries, suggested violations, and implied that he was out of line. The rancher listened, responding only when necessary. He referenced his careful records, photographs, and measurements. Each response was precise and factual, leaving no room for manipulation. He was not angry, he was clear. Clarity, he knew, was a form of strength. The more they tried to provoke him, the more steady he became. His calmness was a shield, his knowledge a sword, and his determination a fortress that no intimidation could penetrate. As the hours passed, the people's confidence began to waver. Their plan, which had seemed foolproof, was falling apart under the weight of his preparation. They tried to intimidate him with volume and threats, but he remained unaffected. Every question they asked, every attempt to corner him, was met with patience and evidence. Slowly, the balance shifted. The rancher, who had once been underestimated and mocked, now held the power in the situation. The tide was turning, and he could sense it. Throughout the confrontation, he kept his focus on the land. Every decision, every word was guided by the knowledge that what he protected was bigger than himself. This was not about pride or revenge. It was about justice and survival. He had worked too long, sacrificed too much, and prepared too carefully to allow fear or mockery to dictate the outcome. He was standing not just for himself, but for everything the land represented: hard work, integrity, and the quiet strength that comes from facing challenges honestly. By late afternoon, the people who had come to intimidate him began to retreat, realizing that their efforts were futile. The rancher remained calm, making no move to chase them away. He did not need to. The truth had revealed itself through his actions. Their confidence, built on assumptions and mockery, had crumbled. The rancher had not shouted, not fought, and not yielded. He had simply stood firm, relying on preparation, knowledge, and patience. His quiet strength had turned what seemed like an impossible situation into a clear victory. Neighbors who had watched from a distance began to whisper among themselves. Some were surprised, others impressed, but all recognized something they had not seen before. The rancher was not weak, not powerless, and not alone. He had faced the challenge calmly, decisively, and with integrity. The mocking words, "No one will save you," had lost their meaning. The rancher had saved himself, and in doing so had shown everyone the power of patience, preparation, and courage. That evening, he walked across his land as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky was painted in colors of orange and pink, a reminder that life continues even after struggle. The animals were calm, the fences were secure, and the land was intact. He felt a quiet satisfaction, not pride, but a deep understanding that he had done what was necessary. He had faced fear, isolation, and mockery, and had emerged without compromise. He had acted not out of anger but out of principle, and that made all the difference. In the following days, the rancher continued his routines, but the atmosphere had changed. The people who had tried to intimidate him no longer approached with confidence. Their threats had lost power. The quiet strength he had shown had created respect, not through words or force, but through action. The rancher had demonstrated that real courage is calm, that patience can be stronger than aggression, and that preparation can overcome even the most confident opponents. Through it all, the rancher remained humble. He did not seek attention or praise. He continued his work, caring for the land and the animals, knowing that the real victory was not in defeating others, but in maintaining integrity and protecting what mattered most. He had faced the storm, endured the pressure, and refused to yield. And as the winter wind blew across the fields, he felt a sense of quiet assurance. He had met the challenge head-on, and in doing so, he had proven something far greater than anyone could mock: the strength of a steady, patient heart. The experience left him changed but not hardened. He understood more deeply the power of observation, preparation, and self-reliance. He had faced people who thought they could control him through fear and intimidation. He had stood alone, yet not powerless. And as he looked over his land, the same land that had nurtured him since childhood, he knew that he would be ready for whatever challenges might come next. Because he had discovered an unshakable truth: strength is not loud, and courage is not always visible. Sometimes it is the quiet determination that wins in the end. The final challenge of the season, though difficult, had reinforced his belief in preparation and patience. It had shown that mockery and intimidation are temporary, but knowledge, steady action, and inner calm can withstand even the greatest pressure. The rancher returned to his home each evening, tired but confident, knowing that he had faced the storm with clarity and resolve. And for the first time in months, the mocking words that had haunted him, "No one will save you," felt powerless. They could not touch him. He had already saved himself. After the confrontation that had tested his patience and courage, the rancher's life returned to its steady rhythm, but everything felt different. The land seemed quieter, yet alive with a new sense of respect, not just from the people who had challenged him, but from himself as well. He walked through the fields in the early morning, boots crunching on frost or dry soil depending on the season, noticing small details that only someone who cared deeply could see. A new sprout pushing through the earth, a fence post firmly standing after a storm, or the soft footprints of animals in the mud. Each one reminded him of the work that mattered and the victories that were quietly earned. The people who had once mocked him and said, "No one will save you," no longer acted with confidence. Some avoided the ranch entirely. Others lingered at the edges of town, quiet and hesitant, unsure how to face the man they had underestimated for so long. The rancher did not seek revenge or confrontation. He never wanted to be feared or hated. His strength was not meant to intimidate, it was meant to protect. Yet it had a natural effect. Respect grew quietly among neighbors and onlookers, not because of loud announcements or declarations, but because they had witnessed what patience, preparation, and quiet determination could achieve. They had learned, perhaps for the first time, that courage does not always announce itself. It acts steadily, without fanfare, and often in silence. The rancher's days remained filled with labor, but they carried a different energy now. He still fed the animals, checked fences, and maintained the land. He still worked before sunrise and long into the evening. But there was a calm that came from knowing he had faced the storm, endured it, and remained unbroken. Even the hardest tasks, repairing fences, clearing brush, or hauling water, felt lighter because they were not just chores. They were part of a life he had chosen and protected. The work became a celebration of resilience rather than a burden. Each action was a reminder that he could endure difficulties without compromising what was rightfully his. People in the town began to notice subtle changes in the rancher's demeanor. Those who had once whispered about his weakness now spoke quietly about his courage. Some neighbors returned to check on him, curious and tentative, unsure if he would welcome them or keep his distance. The rancher, however, offered simple gestures of acknowledgement, a nod, a smile, or a kind word. He did not seek to highlight his victory. He simply carried on with life, showing that strength could exist without arrogance, and that respect could be earned without demanding it. There were moments when he reflected on the journey he had been through. Nights spent alone on the porch, listening to the wind and the sounds of the animals, allowed him to think deeply. He remembered the mocking words, the isolation, and the pressure he had faced. He remembered the preparation, the patience, and the careful observation that had carried him through the confrontation. And he realized something important. The victory was not only about protecting the land or proving others wrong. It was about proving to himself that he could face adversity with dignity and composure. That inner strength was something no one could ever take away. The rancher also thought about the lessons he had learned along the way. He had discovered that solitude, while challenging, could sharpen the mind and strengthen the spirit. He had learned that preparation and patience could turn even the most impossible situations in one's favor. And he had learned that respect earned through calm action was far more enduring than fear gained through loud words or threats. These lessons became a quiet guide for the rest of his life, shaping his decisions and the way he interacted with others. Though the immediate threat had passed, he remained vigilant. The people who had tried to intimidate him were unlikely to forget the lesson he had given them, but new challenges could always arise. He maintained his routines with the same dedication as before, checking fences, keeping records and observing the land closely. He did not act out of fear but out of responsibility. He knew that strength was not a one-time effort, it was a constant practice. Protecting what mattered required consistent action and attention, even in times of peace. As seasons changed, the rancher's story began to spread quietly. Travelers passing through, neighbors visiting town, and people who had once mocked him all spoke of his patience and determination. The words were not exaggerated, they were simple accounts of what they had seen. A man who faced pressure, threats, and mockery, yet remained calm, prepared, and unwavering. The rancher did not seek fame or acknowledgement. He was not looking to become a hero in someone else's story, but in their retelling, he became an example of quiet courage, a reminder that resilience often speaks louder than words. He also reflected on the concept of community. While many had remained distant during the confrontation, some had returned with small gestures of support, checking in, sharing advice, or offering help without expecting anything in return. The rancher appreciated these acts quietly, knowing that trust and respect were built over time, not demanded in a moment of crisis. He understood that his strength had inspired some, reminded others, and taught all who watched that courage and integrity could outlast mockery and intimidation. The rancher continued to face challenges, though they were no longer as severe as before. Weather still threatened crops and animals, equipment still broke, unexpected problems appeared, but he had learned that these were not signs of weakness or failure. They were part of life and part of the responsibility he had chosen to bear. And each time he overcame these challenges, his confidence grew, not arrogance, but calm assurance that he could handle what came his way. This was the lasting victory, the knowledge that he could endure without compromising his values. Neighbors and townspeople who had once mocked him slowly developed a new understanding. Some admitted to themselves that they had underestimated him. Others began to respect his dedication and fairness. Some even approached him with small questions or requests for advice, realizing that the rancher's wisdom and experience could help others. He responded with the same calm patience he had always shown, never boasting, never reminding anyone of the challenges he had faced, simply sharing guidance where it could be useful. Even the children in the area learned from him. They would watch as he worked, noting his careful movements, his attention to detail, and his calm responses to difficulties. Without realizing it, he was teaching them lessons in responsibility, patience, and courage. These were lessons no book could teach and no words could replace. They were lessons learned through observation of a man who had faced pressure, threats, and mockery, and had emerged steady and unbroken. As the years passed, the rancher became a quiet pillar of his community. He was not loud, nor did he seek recognition, but people came to rely on his knowledge, his judgment, and his unwavering integrity. The land he had protected continued to thrive, and the animals he had cared for remained healthy and strong. The mocking words, "No one will save you," had become nothing more than distant echoes of a past struggle. They held no power anymore. He had saved himself, and in doing so, he had secured the respect of others. Looking back, the rancher realized that the challenge he had faced was not just about protecting land. It had been about proving the strength of character, patience, and integrity. He had learned that threats and intimidation could never destroy someone who remained calm, prepared, and confident in their own knowledge and judgment. He had discovered the power of quiet action, the importance of observation, and the lasting impact of steady courage. And so life went on. The rancher continued his work each day, rising early, checking fences, feeding animals, and maintaining the land he loved. The seasons changed, storms came and went, and life remained full of challenges. But he was ready for whatever came next. He had faced the worst, endured pressure that could have broken him, and stood firm when no one else would act. He had faced mockery, threats, and isolation, and through patience, preparation, and quiet strength, he had prevailed. The story of the rancher became one not just of survival, but of example. It was a story of courage that did not shout, of integrity that did not demand attention, and of strength that did not rely on others' approval. Those who had doubted him learned too late that true power often comes quietly, without announcement, and that respect is earned not through words or intimidation, but through action, persistence, and the courage to stand firm when no one else will. Even in the final years of his life, the rancher continued to embody the lessons he had learned. He walked his land each morning, watched over his animals, and maintained the fences that marked the boundaries of everything he had worked to protect. He did not need to prove anything to anyone anymore. His victory had been secured in the quiet moments of steadfast action, the careful planning, and the unwavering patience that had guided him through the most difficult times. And the land, alive and thriving under his care, was the ultimate testament to his courage and determination. In the end, the rancher understood a simple truth. Life does not always reward those who shout the loudest or act the fastest. Sometimes life rewards those who are patient, observant, and prepared. Sometimes life favors those who stand firm, even when no one else is willing to stand with them. And sometimes the greatest victories come quietly, without fanfare, but with results that cannot be denied. The rancher had faced the storm, endured the pressure, and proved that strength and courage are not measured by noise or numbers, but by quiet determination and unwavering integrity. And as the sun set over his land each evening, he could finally rest in the knowledge that he had protected what mattered most, not just for himself, but as an example of the enduring power of patience, preparation, and quiet courage.